Hello everybody, I am Brady Sutterfield from the WMISD Career Tech Center. I'm here with Matt Seward, the editor of the Cadillac News, with a quick news questions about the past week of our local news. So, about the news, how do you find stories to put in the newspaper?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times stories actually find us. We'll have people call in with news tips. We'll have, reporters have beats, and when they go to their meetings and so on, stories will come up. There will be an interesting thing that's said at a meeting. And sometimes there's things like breaking news where, we kind of have to cover. It's, big news of the day, that type of thing, and we're rushing to get it done. So that's kind of how we find our stories. We also, look and talk to other people in the community and try and find out, what's the big issues for them of the day, maybe what some of their struggles are, that type of thing. So there's a lot of different ways that we get stories. And we do rely on the public, we rely on you to give us ideas and tell us what they believe is important. So, I kind of like to turn it around for you and ask you a question so what types of stories do you feel that the Cadillac News is missing that would represent your life?
I don't know if there's anything that represents my life, because my life really isn't too big and bold, but I feel, I don't know how to explain it.
It doesn't have to be big and bold. And then I think that's, a lot of times when we ask that question, people think, I gotta have this great story. And it's not necessarily that. It's like, what's something that's going on every day in your life that you almost take for granted, but maybe it's an irritant to you. Maybe it's, I never see any of my friends in the newspaper, for instance, and they do some cool things. So why isn't that in the paper? So it's stuff like that. Don't overlook that when you might have a story idea, and that really helps us find stories and report on what's going on in the community.
So along with you guys have stories, and you must have like a big influx of them. How do you decide what stories go in the newspaper and what stories get set aside?
Yeah, for us, we focus mainly on local. I mean, we've got a small staff, and we're local. Everyone here is local. We're owned local. So our focus really is our coverage area, which includes Wexford, Missaukee, Osceola, and the eastern part of Lake County. And so that really kind of dictates geographically what stories we run. Now, we also have reporters that have beats, and there's a lot of things that come up in beats, and I know this is boring, especially can be boring, is like covering a city council. And that's one of the things that, we like to do, or like to think that we do, is we cover the boring stuff, but it's actually really important. There's some big issues that have been coming up with the Cadillac City Council. Issues like PFAS in water, and I think we've had an issue here that just came up recently, is they found more PFAS in water that's tested in the ISD well. And so that type of story came up through a beat, and obviously it's important. It's affect obviously your lives, and so that's how we kind of choose is it local, what's the impact, and sometimes it's just a really interesting story. Like I think we've done some on a couple haunted houses that are coming up, and those are really well read, and I think some of the feedback we got from your fellow classmates was they liked that more than some of the other stories, and that's not unusual.
Yeah, on this last news story, we seen the Sophie Spook little haunted house thing.
Sure.
And we all thought that was pretty interesting. And so back to when, obviously I just asked you, how do you decide? What happens to the stories that are set aside? Do you use them later, or do they just go to waste?
Now, if it's local, they generally don't go to waste. I mean, there might be something that we hold. Sometimes we hold a story because it's not quite complete. We're waiting on some information that it might be a developing story, that type of thing, and we hold it and kind of wait for it to basically complete itself, the story. Sometimes, as an editor, I'll go through a story and I have questions about it, and I'll ask the reporter to go back through and see if they can answer some of the questions that I have. But generally, they don't go to waste. We will use them in some way, shape, or form.
You said earlier that like your reporters and stuff have beats. What is a beat?
A beat is like, for instance, I have a reporter that covers the Cadillac City Council in the city of Cadillac, basically. And they would go to city council meetings, planning commission meetings, excuse me, and he would do stories based on the actions of the city council, which obviously impacts the city of Cadillac residents and also can impact townships and neighboring communities. So it has a pretty big reach. Have another reporter that covers the Wexford County Board, the cops in courts, things that, police make arrests in the process when they go through the court system. Excuse me, which is that's a really time-consuming beat, too, and that generates a lot of stories for us. Unfortunately, it generates a lot of stories for us. I don't think anybody really likes covering those, but yeah. So yeah.
How many stories do you think you guys get every day?
That fluctuates. Like, reporters generally will work on 2 to 3, sometimes 4 stories a day, depending what the day is. There's days when, everything seems to be happening. You might have 5 stories that you're working on in some way, shape, or form. They may not all run the next day, unless it's, breaking news type things, and then they would. Trying to think back, this was quite a few years ago when a story that I was involved with is we had an armed robbery in Cadillac, and the robbers, it made a getaway. They were up to Manton and so on, and they actually shot a deputy. He was wounded. So we had stories, about where the bank was robbed, how the robbers got away from the bank, how they were captured, how they were chased, and then the sheriff's deputy who was shot. So that's kind of, you can have a day like that. But sometimes you're working on more in-depth stories, like reporter Chris Lamphere has been working on PFAS in groundwater in the Cadillac area. And that takes more time, takes a lot more research and work. So he may have just one story that day, but it's a lot more work went into it than some of the other stories.
All right. So you were talking about PFAS?
Yeah.
What is PFAS and how does it affect us as humans?
That's great. And we actually have a story coming out on that fairly soon, so I don't want to give away too much. But there is some question about how it actually impacts your life, and what are the health concerns. And there is some. The EPA just recently, I think it was last year, changed what levels of PFAS are acceptable in groundwater or drinking water, and it's much lower. So there's more information coming out on it, but it's a contaminant. It's been used in a lot of different things, such as firefighting foam, non-stick coating on like pans. It's been used in manufacturing, and there's different types of PFAS. So it's pretty in depth. And one thing like I said, I don't want to give away too much. We do have a story coming out fairly soon, explaining it and basically telling what we know at this time. Which there's a lot of questions we still have. So that's a great question. It's one of those, kind of illustrates that stories develop over time, and PFAS is definitely one that's been developing over time as we find more about it. We find more and more that it's in like groundwater. There's been tests of the fish in Lake Cadillac where they found PFAS in some of the fish. So it's a developing story. And really how it started for us was finding PFAS in the wells here at the ISD. So it kind of started here for us.
That is super cool. I'll check out the story when it drops.
Yeah.
So that obviously will affect us a lot continuing in our future. How do you feel your other stories affect us? Because you've had a housing one, which, we're seniors, juniors in high school. We're going to be out in the housing market soon. So that's very important to us.
Correct.
How do you feel the other stories will reach out to your younger teenage audiences?
Yeah, well, it's hard. First of all, not every story is going to affect everybody.
Yes.
Because everybody's life's different. My life is different. Your life is different. I might be 1 or 2 years older than you. So, my perspective is probably different than yours. So every story we have isn't going to interest everybody. And we know that. And it's hard to have a story that affects everybody. But there are stories like the housing story, which, some students might think, it's not that big of a deal. It may not be a big deal to them directly, to you guys directly right now, but in the future it certainly could. And in northern Michigan, pretty much every community has some sort of housing shortage. And there's been a coalition that includes all of northern Michigan, basically, looking at ways to develop more housing. And in the future, as you guys graduate, you get some jobs and whatever, you move out, you want to find a nice place to live. Hopefully, by housing developments like this, that housing opportunity will be there for you in the future.
So you're correct. Not every story will connect with every person. Do you try to sparse out stories, like one for this age group, or do you just try to pick the most objectively relatable stories?
No, we don't look at any certain demographics, if you will, and say, well, we haven't had a story that affects this person or that group of people, that type of thing. We don't do that. We do know that, like if we cover the Pine River School District, there's more interest, obviously, in Pine River than there would be maybe in Cadillac. So we know that. But it's still important to that community, and it could be important to Cadillac. If, for instance, maybe Pine River has this really cool program that they're doing in their school district, and Cadillac sees it and says, wow, that is really cool. Maybe we can somehow use it. So it can have that impact. Yeah.
Yeah, your stories can affect other people in the surrounding area. Like with the Pine River has this cool thing, Cadillac wants to try it out, or Cadillac wants to join it and be a part of it, or maybe work together in it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I feel like the news stories about the schools are really helpful for all the schools in the surrounding area because it can influence students. Like if it's about a student in football that won MVP or something, then that would inspire the other students like, hey, that's really cool. I want to be that MVP. I want to be the best. So that is a very useful tool with the schools in the surrounding area that can work together. They don't have to hate each other. They can work together.
Right.
But, schools are.
Absolutely. I mean, rivalries are fun because they're rivalries. But they're usually, the sportsmanship is usually really good, especially around here. I remember when I covered sports a few years ago, it's been quite a few years ago, I was covering a high school football playoff game. And the team came in on a bus and the weather was terrible. I mean, it was cold and it was just terrible weather. One of the team's buses was leaving and it got stuck. So the other team got together and pushed the bus out. So, you know, they just had a really grueling playoff game, but they, you know, set aside the rivalry and helped the other team out. And so it was really cool to see. And there's a lot of stuff like that happens around here.
Well, that was some great news. It was awesome having you here. Talk to you next week. Thank you for coming out. Make sure you pick up the Cadillac News to get the latest stories, or go to CadillacNews.com for more information. Have a great day.